So welcome to the show, Sheila.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
It's so good to have you. You know, I love this topic, and today's focus is we're going to be talking a lot about sex and how to have great sex and how to overcome some of the obstacles. But, you know, the truth is, I think a lot of times for most couples, not all couples, for most couples, talking about sex is about as comfortable as sleeping in the car. And Sheila's here to help us overcome that in a big, big way. You know, the thing is that, you know, when you talk to couples, it's been reported that like the number one issue of why they don't have sex is because they just they find that they're too tired, and then right behind that is they're not in the mood. Right. And usually this is code for differences in libido. And I wanted to start there and just kind of dive into this idea of what advice would you share with couples who are experiencing this kind of the desire level is different between men and women?
Yeah, and you know, we often picture it as the guy has the higher libido, but in about 30% of marriages, it's actually the woman. And I have different responses based on who it is. So let's just assume for a minute that it's the guy, because that's normally what we think of.
Right.
So the guy has the higher libido, and the woman is running around and she's exhausted. And at the end of the day, she collapses into bed and she's not in the mood. Okay. I'm going to talk to you ladies here just for a sec. So here's me talking to the ladies. Ladies, our libidos are almost entirely here, okay? For guys, they're a little bit lower. For women, they're almost entirely here. And what you think about sex is going to determine your libido. The problem is we watch these movies, and in movies, the couple is together, and they're panting, and they start kissing, and the clothes come off, and they have sex. And so we start to think that's what happens, you know? You're panting, you kiss, the clothes come off, you have sex. And so here we women are, and we're waiting to be panting. Because we think that's what's supposed to happen, right? Like that's what happens when you're in the mood. And yet it doesn't work that way for most women. Okay, most guys are aroused before they start to make love. That doesn't take rocket science.
We just need air.
Yes, exactly. But for most women, you're not aroused until after you start. And so this is where the sex drive being in your brain matters. When you go throughout your day, if you think to yourself, I am going to have a good time tonight. We are going to have a good time tonight. We're going to connect, and you start getting excited about it. Then when you get into bed, if you're telling yourself those positive messages, you know, I love my husband, I want to feel relaxed, I want to have fun, chances are your body will follow. But if you're spending your entire day looking after everybody else and getting really, really tired in the process, there's no way you're going to want to make love. It all depends what we say to ourselves.
Interesting.
Yeah. And here's one other little tip. I used to say no a lot when I was exhausted. And then you try to go to sleep and you know that your husband's upset with you, and you can feel how ticked off he is on the other side of the bed, and then you get ticked off at him for being ticked off. You don't sleep well, and then the whole next day you're ticked off. Whereas if you had just jumped him at the beginning of the night, you would have slept so well. And so now when I'm tired, I say to my husband, come put me to sleep, baby, and it works so much better.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, it's almost like you're suggesting that great slogan that we're also well acquainted with is "Just do it" from Nike. Is that somewhat of the advice you'd be giving to the women here today? Just do it.
Exactly. Because libido for women is largely a use it or lose it phenomenon. The more you make love, the more you tend to want to make love. Whereas if you go through a drought of 2-3 weeks where you don't make love, you could probably go another 3 weeks and it wouldn't bother you.
Right.
And so we need to keep revving ourselves.
Okay, so let's talk about the guys, because I know that, yeah, this was good to start with the ladies, but I think for the guys, the whole high desire, low desire, I want to hear more about what you talked about. That oftentimes it's kind of like we've segregated this as, you know, it's the guys with the high desire, women low desire, but you're seeing this differently.
Yes. And like I said, in about 30% of marriages, well, between 24 and 30% of marriages, it's the guy that has the lower sex drive. And there's several possible reasons for this. It could just simply be stress. you go through a period of stress at work, you go through a lot of layoffs, that sort of thing can really wear on someone. It could be illness of some sort. A lot of medications interfere with libido, antidepressants, some diabetes medications, all of these can affect libido. It could be relationship issues. So you've been having issues in the past, there's been infidelity, whatever it might be, and so he doesn't feel comfortable. But one of the main reasons for a guy's low libido that really does need to be addressed is pornography. Mm-hmm. It's really sad, but porn is very widespread, and porn will just destroy a guy's libido because you've trained your brain to be aroused by an image rather than a person. And then when you get into a relationship, she's no longer attractive. Even if you want her to be, mm-hmm. she no longer is attractive. And so that's a problem.
Wow. What about, I don't know if you hear this much, but what would you say to the wife of the guy who says, I'm tired of being reluctantly accommodated but never pursued when it comes mm-hmm. to sex?
Yeah, and I like when I give a girl talk around the country where I talk about sex at a lot of churches and different events. It's really fun. And one of the lines I use is that your husband wants to be wanted. He mm-hmm. doesn't want to be placated. And I think a lot of us think that what men want is sexual release. Well, no, you know what? He can get that on his own. I hate to be graphic, but that's not what he wants. Right. What he wants is to feel connected to you. And what he wants is for it to be an experience where it truly is intimate. And most men, what they really want is to feel like they can make their wives feel great, that they can make their wives fly. And if you're lying there saying, well, you can if you want to, that's about the most unsexy thing there is. I think what I would say to women is, sex was made to make you feel so intimate. It's supposed to be intimate on 3 levels: physical, emotional, and spiritual. Mm-hmm. And when you feel like you are one, like you are totally connected, there's nothing like that in the world. Too often we make sex into just about the physical, and we think, well, if I'm not in the mood or I'm too tired, and we reduce it to something physical. And what you miss out on is all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And so we need to start emphasizing that sex is a beautiful thing in marriage, and don't diminish it, because when you do that, you lose out on your relationship. You lose out on all these great things that God has planned for you.
I can't help but think a lot of our listeners, for the ladies, might be thinking right now, yeah, but you haven't been married to my guy, right? And part of it is that they're doing the, hey, you awake, and there's very little effort that they're putting into the relationship. Could that be, and I'm asking the expert here, could that be part of the reason why they're being reluctantly accommodated and not pursued? Because they haven't figured out that component of, it's not so much what's happening in the bedroom, it's what's happening outside the bedroom. So for guys, what would you say to them to be more want-worthy when it comes to this whole thing of sex?
Yeah, you know what, men, you've got to romance your wife. You just do. And the biggest way to romance most women is just to talk to them. I like to tell my husband that most women's brains are like a huge pinball machine. Okay, so at any given time, there are all these pinballs going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it is so distracting, and it is just horrendous for us. But at any given time, we're thinking about our kids, and we're thinking about what we have to make for dinner, and we're thinking about the fact that we're having company on Saturday, and the house is a mess. Like, there's all these things going on in our heads. And the only way to be able to relax enough to have sex is to get rid of those pinballs. The only way to get rid of them is to talk about them. Mm. And so, guys, you need to talk to your wife and need to just learn what helps her to relax. Because the number one reason that women say no to sex is we don't feel relaxed and we don't feel like we're important. We will feel so much more relaxed if you just take time to talk to us and to help us debrief at the end of the day.
So in a way, you're talking about emotional needs. It's meeting each other's emotional needs, which generally mm-hmm. is, for women, it's not high on the sexual fulfillment side, but it's more on being able to be met on that affection, intimacy, conversation level. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or to put it simply, men make love in order to feel loved, whereas women need to feel loved in order to make love.
Okay, that's
so
good.
If you're a guy,
I like that.
Yeah, if you're a guy and your wife doesn't feel loved, she's not going to want to make love.
Right. Right. That's good. In your book, you talk about sexual insecurities for both men and women. And I think that plays into a part to this. What would you say for the men when it comes to sexual insecurities? And I think more probably related to women. Has that been your case? Is that what you found to be true?
You know what? I think we all have a lot of sexual insecurities. I think we live in a culture which is just so degraded sex. Mm-hmm. I was in New Orleans last week with my family on a business trip, and then I did some speaking, and boy, was that depressing. Just walking along Bourbon Street and seeing how our culture treats sex. And I think when you grow up in that culture, whether you're a man or a woman, you are going to feel so many insecurities. As a guy, you're going to feel like you don't perform well, or she doesn't, I'm not physically adequate, all of that stuff. As a woman, you're going to feel like my body is too big. There's all kinds of things. And again, I think it comes to stopping seeing sex as only a physical thing and starting to understand that there's a huge difference between making love and having sex. And in marriage, you can truly make love. And that means that you become totally vulnerable to each other. You can't make love unless you're able to be completely vulnerable. And you're able to trust them enough to tell them your insecurities. And, you can't just do that right off the bat. You have to trust your spouse. So the best way to get sex better in your marriage is to work on your friendship, to be able to talk about stuff, to let your spouse know that you trust them completely and that you are trustworthy. And when you've got that sorted out, then you can talk about some of these things that are so personal and so scary that we often don't open up about them.
So huge. I think you've nailed it right there. That was really, I think what we've experienced as we've traveled around and had a chance to meet with many, many couples. And this is a big topic. I mean, this is the topic that ultimately drives many couples to counseling. And one of our distinct group that we get an honor to serve is our military. And I want to ask a question related to, for them, oftentimes there's this component that's thrown into it. I mean, marriage is hard without it. But when you throw in deployment, oftentimes that can become a real challenge. Well, what would you say to military couples in terms of keeping the passion alive in the relationship when they're deployed and there's that separation?
Yeah, that is so hard. And I feel woefully inadequate to talk to that because I am so in awe of people who serve in the military. And my assistant, actually, one of my best friends, her husband's a military chaplain. And so we've talked about this back and forth, and I've watched him go through several deployments, and it is really a challenge. I think the question that, to be totally honest, the question that I get from a lot of military spouses is it okay if I send him with pictures of myself, of me, in various states of undress or whatever? And I don't know. Personally, I would just be afraid someone else would see them.
Right.
I think there's a practical nature of it, whether or not that's a good idea. I think when you're deployed, it's best just to stick as much as you can to keeping your friendship going and keeping the lines of communication open, and then really looking forward to being reunited. Because when you are separated, it's just going to be hard. And I think that if we try to fill that with other things, you can start to cross a line or get into stuff that can be a little dangerous. So, there's a lot to that sublimation thing. Yeah. That's what they call it when people take that sexual energy and they throw it into something else because you're frustrated. So you just throw it into something else. That's how the greatest works of art were created, by people who were sublimating their sexual desire. And so maybe for those months that he's away, she takes on new projects at church and she just becomes total super mom. And maybe he is just so busy, hopefully, with the military, or vice versa, if she's the one who's deployed. But it is tough, and there's no getting around it. It is really tough. Yeah. But you just have to get through it.
I've asked that question to a lot of different experts. It was really interesting. I love the idea of throwing that passion into something that might not be your relationship at the moment, but it could be something that you can really get involved in to allow that time to not feel like it's so long. Because the worst thing in the world is to it's 9 p.m. and you have nothing to do and you're lonely. Right. Well, I think one of the challenges that we've had voiced to us from military wives and husbands is just this component of you touched on it earlier about pornography, and even the idea that this maybe would be something that would help during the time apart as a way to, meet each other's needs. But then the crippling aspect of when they come back together and that's become an addiction. I know that you've handled a lot of this on your website in terms of just people coming and sharing the devastation. What are some of the things that you've found to be incredibly damaging by introducing that into the relationship?
Yeah, I like I said, I have a really difficult time taking a firm stand on it because I think each relationship is different. If your husband's never struggled with pornography and he just wants a picture of you in a bikini, that's probably not a big deal. If your husband has really struggled with pornography and he comes to you and he says, "Can I have a picture of you naked so that I'm not tempted to look at porn?" Because the problem is not the pornography. The problem is that he has associated his sexual desire and his sexual arousal with an image rather than in a relationship. And if you become that image, you're not actually solving a problem. You're just replacing it. And what he really needs to do is to find intimacy arousing again, as opposed to a picture arousing. Right. Because he's lost the ability for intimacy to be arousing. I surveyed about 2,000 people for my book, The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex. And what I found, and this was consistent with other studies too, is that the women, for instance, who are the most likely to achieve orgasm in marriage are those who feel the most spiritually connected to their spouses. And the men who report the most sexual satisfaction too are the ones who are the most spiritually intimate with their spouses. So the best aphrodisiac is not pornography and it's not sex toys or any of that. It's really feeling like you're one. And so if you have someone who's been struggling with porn, you can't become porn to cure porn. Right. What you need to do is deal with the root issue, which is that they've lost the ability to be truly intimate, and figure out how to rebuild that in your relationship.
Wow, that's really, really helpful. And I think it relates to, you talk about building intimacy. I want to talk about the segment of the population who are raising small children, which have been known to be the anti-sex mechanism in the relationship. Yes. What advice would you give to those young couples who have young kids in the home? How do you keep sex alive and frequent and all those things when you have the demands and the challenges? What is that? Yeah. What would you say to them?
Okay, number one, most important thing you can do when you have little kids, teach them to go to sleep on their own at a decent time. Okay?
Not in your room.
That's the best thing you can do for your marriage is get your kids to sleep at a decent time. If your kids will only go to sleep if you lie down on the bed with them and stay there until they fall asleep, bedtime routines are going to start lasting 2.5 hours. And you can't do that. So, you need to, we're going to have a bath, we're going to read a story, we're going to have prayers, and then you go to sleep. And that's it in your own room. And so many people find that they get their life back. When their kids are asleep by 7:30 or 8, suddenly you get your life back because you have 2 hours at night just with your spouse. So that's the number one thing. Number two, I think, is give yourself a bit of a break. What kids really need more than anything else is to feel connected, is to feel like their parents are connected. And if you spend all of your energy on your kids, you're really depriving your children of the thing that they need most. What they need most is for you and your husband or you and your wife to be super strong together. So the kids don't have to be in every activity. You don't have to spend every waking minute stimulating your children. You can leave them alone and tell them to go play on their own or play with their siblings. You don't need to be entertaining them all the time. And try to get some downtime during the day so that at night you don't need your own downtime. You can just be with your spouse.
Yeah. So along those facts, I mean, that's more about what's happening outside the bedroom. Let's just focus on the bedroom for a moment here. What would you say are some really great tips to help increase pleasure in whether it's foreplay or even in the act?
Okay, one trick that I've told a lot of couples to do, especially if they need to just get back to basics because we've gone so far off track or it just isn't working, is set the timer for 15 minutes. And believe me, this will feel like the longest 15 minutes of your life, but set the timer for 15 minutes and have him explore her body. She's not allowed to move. She's not allowed to talk. Okay. And just figure out what makes her feel good. Because I think what happens often with women is you're doing the whole foreplay thing and it's not really working for us, but we feel embarrassed because we women think, well, he's excited, so I should be excited. And I'm just taking too long, and I know he's getting aggravated, so let's just get on with it. And we don't give ourselves the time that we need. And because of that, a lot of women don't actually know what they like. Like, a lot of women have no clue what makes them feel good because we've never actually figured it out. So take that 15 minutes, let him figure it out, and then do the reverse. Let her take 15 minutes and figure him out, because that can make a woman feel very sexually powerful to see the impact that she can have on him. And I think a lot of women need that self-esteem, especially if you're worried about body image or you're worried that he's not really interested in me. To see how excited you can get him is a really good thing. So I'm not talking about, bondage or 50 Shades of Grey stuff. I'm just saying, like agree that you're not going to move and just let each other explore. And if either of them actually are victims of child sexual abuse, that can be very freeing, because if you know that you're the one in control, that your spouse is not going to move, that you are the one totally in control, then that can help you get over some hurdles that's difficult to do if you're both engaged at the same time.
Yeah. So that's back to the basics. Let's add a little bit of spice to it. What would you say to the couple? And this could go either way. The one who's really adventurous and wants to try a lot of different things, and the other one who's like, you know what? Yeah. Sex is very closed off and it's very, missionary, I guess you could call it. What would you say to them?
You can compromise. You know what? You can do all kinds of stuff. You can give each other fun coupons, for whatever, if he wants something in particular that she isn't that interested in, give him a couple of coupons that he can use every now and then. And that frees her up because she knows it's not going to be every time. He's not going to ask every time. It's seen as a special thing. And so that can help. Another thing you can do is like his and her nights. So 2 Saturdays every month, you do what he wants. 2 Saturdays every month, you do what she wants. And maybe what she wants most is like a 45-minute massage before we get to the act or whatever.
Non-sexual touch.
Right. Or maybe she's the more adventurous one, and you try a bunch of different things. But I think the good thing about that is that if it's very clear that this is his night, or it's very clear that this is her night, that's different from every other night. And so if there is something that he wants or that she wants, the other spouse doesn't have to feel like, if I give in tonight, they're going to want this every night. They know that, okay, we're just doing something fun. And, I think most relationships work better that way, when sometimes it's really, really spicy and sometimes it's just your maintenance, getting your oil changed kind of thing,
Right.
And that's all right. There's nothing wrong with that.
And that's so huge. I think so often, and maybe this is for younger couples who are newly married, there's this expectation that it's just going to be like the full course meal every single time. And the reality is that life kind of blows you back on that one in a very significant way, in terms of, what we have to settle for sometimes just it's the appetizer and not the full course meal. Yeah. What would you say to those couples who have high expectations, but they just feel like their expectations are not being met in their sex life?
Mm-hmm. Well, number one is communication. You just have to talk about it. A simple thing. Guys and men and women like to be touched in very different ways. Okay, men like touch a lot rougher than women do. Women like it a lot softer. And so when you first get married, if you're not really aware of that, the guy can just bowl her right over and it doesn't feel good at all. And the woman's touch can just be too feathery. And so and yet if we don't say anything then you're stuck not really making each other feel very good. So you've got to just talk about it. Talk about what feels good. Talk about preferences. Talk about it in the dark if you have to. Turn the lights off. Lie back to back if you're embarrassed. It doesn't matter. Just talk about it. And then number two, I think if you're just not getting your expectations met, remember that marriage is a decades-long thing. And when I did do those surveys, interestingly, I found that the best years for sex in marriage are years 16 to 24.
Wow.
After you've been married. Yeah, you've been married for a decade and a half or two. There's no longer babies. You've had that time to really develop trust. You've finally figured out how this all worked. We think it's the honeymoon years, but it really isn't. For most people, it comes far later. And so, if you're sitting at year 3, that's all right. Just make this into the best research project you're ever going to do, and know that for most people, it gets a lot better.
Right.
And then the other thing is, sex is so much like this throughout our lives. Just when you've got it figured out, you get pregnant. And then your libido changes, your body changes. And then, you come through the baby years, and then you get stress at work. And then you come through that, and then she hits perimenopause. And it's like every time you think you've got it figured out, something changes. I think that's okay. That's just life. And that gives us more opportunity to, again, connect, communicate, keep that friendship going, and just get used to it again.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And so your book, 31 Days to Great Sex, tell us about that, because I think it's fascinating how you put this together. Tell our listeners a little bit about how you structured it and what your ultimate goal in writing that book was.
Okay, well, first of all, there's a very important word in that title. It's 31 Days
to Great.
Two. No, it's two great sex.
Two. I missed the two. Okay.
Days. No, it's not 31 days of great sex. Okay, so.
Is that what I said?
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
You said it right.
I did. Okay.
I'm not saying you have to have sex for 31 days straight. That's not.
That's a good clarification. Now, all the guys were hoping that you had written it that way. 31 days of great sex, but.
Yeah. No, so what it is it's like 2 to 4 pages that you read together each night, and then you do the challenge. And it's broken up. So roughly the first week, you're just getting to know each other better. You're talking about sex. You're figuring out how you each feel about sex. Then you're going to work on your emotional intimacy, feeling like we're having fun together, like we're flirting again, like we're being affectionate. Then we're going to have a week on physical intimacy, so making it feel great. That's where we spice things up a bit. Yeah. And then a week on spiritual intimacy, which is so important. Just feeling like we really are one, like it's very, very intimate. And then just a few days on how to keep it going. And as I've talked to couples who've worked through it, most of them say the biggest impact has been they've just learned to talk about sex again because they never had an opportunity to. So that's so key. If we can just talk about it, we can get through so many things.
So what about the couple who's not spiritual? Would this book still apply to them?
I really did try to write it so that whether or not you're Christian, it will apply. I do think, even if you're not a Christian, I think all of us would agree that there's something very spiritual or even mystic about the bond between you when you make love. And I believe that comes from the way that God created it. But even if that isn't your belief, I think that you will find that the tips I give for experiencing that kind of spiritual intimacy apply to everybody.
Very cool. And what she's talking about, if you want to know more about this book and how to pick it up, it's going to be right below the video. We have a link out to buy her book, which I've read. Is amazing. It's really, you've done a great job. I think
Thank you.
I've read a lot of different books on sex and intimacy and romance and all those kind of things. You did a really good job of framing it in a way that creates the conversation, because I think that's the missing piece. So much, there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, but it's actually having a conversation with our spouse that is so needed in this. So thank you for that. Thank you, Sheila, for being on the show. This has been super, super valuable, and best of luck with all that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Take care.